welcome everybody. Yes, I should try not to break the chair or something. Thank you for coming. I'm very pleased to present our very distinguished speaker who, after a long journey, made it to Bologna, Ahmad Masa'deh, Ambassador Ahmad Masa'deh. He held many different hats and roles. He was the Minister for Public Sector Reform in Jordan. He was then Jordan's ambassador to the EU, to NATO, to Belgium, Luxembourg, and Norway. And he was the first elected Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean. Now, those who are taking my class obviously know what I'm talking about, right? Today, he's a managing partner of Khalaf Masa'deh, LLC, where he practices contract and insurance and commercial law and acts of litigation. And arbitration. Previously, he was assistant professor of international business law at the Faculty of Law of the University of Jordan. And he also held over the years various management and advisory positions in advisory boards or councils of different very important companies and institutions, which include the Council of the World Trade Law Association in London, Royal Jordanian Airlines, and many others. Ambassador Masa'deh holds a Bachelor of Law with honors from the University of Jordan. He holds a Master of Law from the University of Virginia in Charlottesville and a PhD from King's College in London. He is decorated with Jordan's Order of Independence of the First Class and also with Belgium's Order of the Crown of the Grand Cross class, in French, Grand Croix de l'Ordre de la Couronne. And just for those of you who don't really know what the Union for the Mediterranean is, just 2 words on that. It was founded in 2008, 2009. It is an intergovernmental organization that comprises 43 member states. That includes 27 member states of the European Union, plus 16 states or entities from the southern and eastern Mediterranean, and it is embedded into European Union policies towards what it calls the southern Mediterranean, right? And its aim is to enhance regional cooperation, dialogue, and also the implementation of specific regional projects that are supposed to matter for citizens. No? And as the first elected Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean, obviously has some very important insights to share with us. So thank you very much for coming, Ambassador Masa'deh, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rafaela. I think that I'll speak from here. It's a pleasure for me to be again in a university and also speaking to students. I mean, you remind me of my old days at the University of Jordan. It's always a pleasure to speak to those who have ambitions for the future. All right. Thank you very much for the introduction. It's a pleasure for me to be here at Johns Hopkins University and speak to your distinguished class today. So I'm going to speak to you today about the Euro-Mediterranean cooperation, the challenges and the prospects for the future. And the way that I divided my talk is in 2 parts. Firstly, I'll give you some feedback from my experience as a witness of facts, if we call it in law, as to what we've done at the UFM, the Union for the Mediterranean. And then I will give you or share with you some of my thoughts about the prospects for regional cooperation in the future. And I don't know your backgrounds, but it'll be interesting for me to know also where you come from, because the things that I'm going to raise probably will raise flags for you or for some of you. All right, so in 2010, I was elected as the first Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean. At that time, I had an experience of 4 years in Brussels as the ambassador of Jordan to the EU. And that gave me a flavor of European cooperation. Coming from a region that was far from being united, I was fascinated with the European project and how it brought together a Swede and a Portuguese, if I may, often asking myself the question, I mean, what do they have in common? And then I understood firsthand that it is common interest. I wondered if this can be created in the southern rim of the Mediterranean. Mind you, I am of an Arab unitary background and thinking. That is why when I was nominated for the Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean position, I was excited because I thought that it entailed creating common interest, north-south and south-south, something which meshes with my political principles and beliefs. But I also fully understood the challenges which lay ahead. Since I have a story to tell, allow me to share with you some of the challenges which I and the Secretariat faced at the beginnings. After being appointed Secretary General, I opted to make my very first official trip or visit to my home country, Jordan. And upon meeting His Majesty King Abdullah of Jordan, he asked me what was the most worrying challenge for me in this new endeavor. I said, if the member states bring on their political differences, the project will sink. In particular, I mentioned to the king that I was concerned that the Palestinian-Israeli stumbling peace process might have its toll on the project, and that unforeseeable geopolitical turbulences will impact the commitment and seriousness of those countries involved. My worries proved not wrong. The so-called Arab Spring was at our doorsteps at that time. My nomination and thereafter election, these are incidents that were not always smooth sailing for me. I can divulge information now after 10 years, right? It's, confidentiality, I know. So for example, the French preferred a Francophone speaking Secretary General. Although I tell you, my French was not that too awful. Morocco probably, acting under French pressure, had an appetite for the position, but eventually succumbed to the unanimous decision passed at the Arab League Doha Summit in late 1999, naming me as the only Arab candidate for the position. Of course, Morocco, I assume, did not want to upset the excellent bilateral relationships between Amman and Rabat at the time. Syria opposed the project because Damascus did not want to be grouped in one organization with Israel, especially that the main objective of the UFM, as Rafaela just mentioned, builds on the narrative of the Barcelona process, which aims at promoting cooperation among member states. So the Syrians and also the Lebanese saw that this process is premature, and it hits at core the principle of land for peace, being a cornerstone for peace between the Arabs and Israel. For those who are following on the peace process in the Middle East, they understand for sure the concept of land for peace. In fact, the name Union for the Mediterranean, and I wonder if you have ever asked yourself, from where did it come from? It was suggested by the late Syrian Foreign Minister, Walid al-Muallim, and eventually agreed by other countries as a compromise, compared to other names suggested originally, such as the Mediterranean Union. Quite a difference, Union for the Mediterranean and Mediterranean Union. That is a question for you. I mean, what is the difference? I'll tell you. I'll tell you. Okay. Well, the Syrians thought that by using the word Union for the Mediterranean, that everybody will be working for the benefit of the Mediterranean region or the sea itself. However, the other term means that it will benefit cooperation between member states. So the word for was put by the Syrians to show that we're working for a geographic area, but not for other member states, in order not for them to work with Israel. And now, after all these years, I wonder who and what effect did the project benefit thus far, in any name, you name it. Thereafter, Syria agreed to join. At one point, I was told by the Syrian government that they were happy with my nomination because I come with an Arab unitary background, which is part of their policy. Discussions over the final declaration of the UFM Ministerial Conference, which took place on the 3rd and 4th of November 2008 in Marseille, was marathonic, to say the least. Delegates took discussions as thorough and technical to the wording of every page. The objectives of the Union witnessed heated debate. In one incident, to my shock and that of French Foreign Minister Bernard Kouchner at the time, while we were deliberating, Tzipi Livni, Foreign Minister of Israel, deliberately ignored Amr Moussa, Secretary General of the Arab League, who extended his hand for a shake because he was too Arab or too pro-Arab and Palestinian cause, as we understood later on. Amr Moussa complained on the spot to Bernard Kouchner, saying, and I remember the words, "You see, this is how you kick off a promising regional project meant to foster cooperation." On the evening of the 4th of November, after the successful conclusion of the conference, ignoring the objections of our hotel staff that the lobby was a no-smoking area, Miguel Angel Moratinos, Foreign Minister of Spain at the time, being in a very celebrative mood, invited Amr Moussa, Salah ad-Din al-Bashir, Foreign Minister of Jordan, Ahmad Abul Ghait, Foreign Minister of Egypt at the time, and myself to smoke some good Cuban cigars. It was his treat. The launching ceremony of the Secretariat at the historical Pedralbes Palace in Barcelona, which was donated by the Catalan government to become the union's headquarters, was a night to remember. I remember that night. High-level officials from many countries, distinguished stakeholders, and tens of media representatives were invited. The heat was high and expectations were skyrocketing. On the night I was officially instated in office, I delivered a speech in which I vowed to work for fostering real cooperation with real projects, the effect of which should be felt by the peoples of the two rims of the Mediterranean. And I also pledged to carry my duties impartially and independently. I don't think that this settled well with everyone. The work of the Secretariat at the early stages was not easy. For example, I was engaged in finalizing and signing the headquarters agreement with the Spanish government, building a human capacity of the Secretariat, creating synergy with and among my 6 deputies in charge with the 6 sectors comprising the Union for the Mediterranean. And for you who know the UFM, you know that we have 6 sectors to work within. Engaging with the Catalan officials on issues relating to the Secretariat and the premises. And you'll be surprised also, and even following up on architectural designs and construction works carried out at the premises in order to host everyone. So we were keeping busy. The Spanish government and the Catalan government, I have to say, for history, were very engaging and serious about the project. After all, the Barcelona process historically started from there. On the 4th of May, 2020, I signed with Miguel Angel Moratinos in his office at the Spanish Foreign Ministry, the headquarters agreement, which gave the Secretariat diplomatic and other immunity privileges. Again, he invited me to smoke cigar. The work started in 2010. And in the year to come, challenges started coming in. Some were not that important and in fact amusing, but those which got me worried were to do with the level of commitment and seriousness towards the project. And when I tell you these stories, I hope that they are amusing, but also I want you to reflect on what they mean in terms of the goodwill of everyone to do the job. Sometimes the small stories give you an example or something to think about of a bigger thing. Let me give you this example, for instance. So, for instance, I was not bothered when the Turks objected to my appointment of a Cypriot lady in the position of head of legal. During discussions of the Marseille final declaration, the Cypriots raised concerns for allocating one of the deputy secretary general positions to Turkey. To diffuse things, and though I had no capacity at the time, I promised Cypriot Foreign Minister Marcos Cipriano at the time, I promised him that once I'm in office, I will create a high-level position in my cabinet and give it to a national of his own. So you see, Turkey and Cyprus brought their differences from day one to the project. A bit more worrying was when I tried to circulate a mega logistical depot project between Morocco and Algeria, trying smartly to move the deep waters between the two nations and overcome, smartly again, I thought, the closed land borders between the two countries for 20 years at the time. Words were spread, and the foreign minister of Algeria conveyed to me not to even think about such an idea. The objectives, as embodied in the Union's founding documents, were meant to create multi-billion euros socio-economic mega projects in domains such as energy, water, education, transportation, and others. We at the Secretariat at the time were tasked by the member states to prepare and submit the Secretariat first annual budget, which also comprised proposing some projected projects in those domains, which I just mentioned. Everyone at the Secretariat worked diligently and hard, and each deputy SG presented to me his or her sector's budget. A 300-page document was presented to the senior officials early fall 2010, I think, with an expected budget of approximately 18 million euros for the Secretariat. Eventually, member states brought down that figure to become around 1 million euros, if I remember correctly. It is at that time that I felt that this project will not go far. I am not blaming anyone here. Maybe the regional circumstances were pressing, issues were evolving. The Arab Spring was starting in Tunisia and picking up in Egypt. French President Nicolas Sarkozy, a patron of the project, was facing internal issues also. Less enthusiastic countries saw this as an opportunity to escalate their differences. Brussels wanted to have complete hands-on and was hesitant to invest in the budget. So such events comprised the recipe to reformulate the once projected regional intergovernmental organization charged with mega projects affecting the lives of people along the two shores of the Mediterranean into a dialogue platform geared towards smaller projects. Since I left, and by way of a disclaimer, which we lawyers are masters in making, I do not have solid information about the works of the UFM Secretariat. But at least I can sense that its effect continued to be limited. At least that is in my point of view, and I'm not sure what the normal person on the streets of Rabat or Beirut or Athens or Berlin, for example, thinks. Today, the Secretariat website states that since 2012, there has been 60 labeled projects. Labeled projects meaning that they have been approved as UFM projects. And moreover, 300 ministerial and expert fora was conducted. The question is, how did these projects and meetings shape the events of the Arab Spring? How did they ease the economic difficult situations and skyrocketing unemployment rates in the Arab and Southern countries? And if it was meant to have a central and effective role, would not have it been able to create a plan B for EU countries in the wake of the Russian-Ukrainian war? Having demonstrated all these challenges, I am not saying that the UFM has not added a brick to the wall of cooperation, as I said, and I commend all efforts put by the SGs and staff who served after me. I put before you this narrative to tell you a story as a witness of facts. And in doing this, I am laying the ground for my hereafter proposals. By the way, this is not my speech. I think that it's chopped. It's not fully printed. If Alessandra can, I can continue from my mobile. To understand why there is a need. Excellent. Yes. Yeah. So to understand why there is a need for proper and efficient cooperation, let us compare some figures and draw conclusions. Arab population stands today at around 350 million, whereas the EU population is about 500 million, and the United States is about 310 million. The ratio of gross domestic product to the world gross output for the Arabian area is 3.7%, compared to 20% in the case of the EU and 19.8% in the case of the US. Foreign trade ratio is 4.9% in the case of the Arab countries, compared to 33.8% for the EU and 10.7% for the US. Again, as a disclaimer, I stand to be corrected if these figures have changed. Most importantly, unemployment rates, according to UN statistics for the year 2022, is 12% for the Arab region, and I highly doubt this, because I believe that it is over 25%, and probably for youngsters, it hovers around 50%, if not more, compared to 6.7% in the EU zone and 3.7% in the US. In the context of Arab-Arab economic relations, intra-Arab trade is 10% of the total trade volume of the Arab countries, in comparison to inter-trade ratios of other regional blocs, such as the Asian group, standing at 40%, Latin America bloc standing at 20%, and the EU standing at 70%. Just remember the figures. Against the background of such figures, I believe that only result-oriented cooperation measures which affect directly the lives of people can only create a sense of belief, trust, and ownership among citizens. Theoretical debates and photo opportunity meetings do not help. This is why I believe that the cooperation platforms hosting a wide range of countries with different interests and backgrounds should be replaced with smaller blocks. For modern age, threats and challenges have caused the melting of the traditional divide between the North and the South, Europe and the Arabs, divides such as or based on religion and culture. And hence, we need to depart from such traditional divides to ones based on common interests, threats, and understanding. For instance, I raise the question of what does the term Mediterranean mean today? Is it only a geographic reference? Is it a political benchmark? Or is it a socio-economic frame? Now, the answer will for sure have an effect on which countries or regions are to be included in any future prospects of cooperation. Regional smaller cooperation blocks made of like-minded countries make sense to me in this modern age, particularly in the wake of transborder globalized threats and opportunities. For example, the issue of terrorism proved to be supranational and transboundary. The so-called Arab Springs effect was not only limited from a socio-economic impact on Arab countries, but also had its tolls on Europe. Finally, the Russian-Ukrainian war did not only affect the supply chains and food and energy issues in Europe, but also it hit hard some Arab countries and also obviously the rest of the world. Today, countries which resemble one another ought to group in smaller common platforms. And by the way, this was the initial proposal of President Sarkozy, Nicolas Sarkozy, during his electoral campaign to establish a Mediterranean Union comprising 10 states, 5 from the south and 5 from the north. However, Germany's strong opposition at the time to such a proposal and threatening that the whole EU will be under risk and Germany will start looking more towards East European countries, ended up the idea of Mr. Sarkozy, and when we ended up with this with the format that you know as the UFM today. I turn to technology now. Yeah. No, yeah. Now, for example, talking about smaller blocks, the 5+5 dialogue, and I'm sure if these, I'm not sure if they are familiar with these, terminologies, yeah. The 5+5 dialogue and the Agadir agreement. Agadir agreement is a trade agreement between Jordan, Egypt, Tunisia, and Morocco, can be tested and built on. We're talking about smaller blocks here. For instance, the Agadir agreement can be expanded to include countries which share the same political and economic views, especially in the domains of energy, water, and transportation. Moreover, new blocks can be created to include, for instance, the GCC countries and beyond. I would like to finish with shedding some light on some issues which may have countries rally around in the southern European and northern Mediterranean region, and leave further explanation to the Q&A if you have any. Proposed smaller platforms should act on the following issues. Firstly, in the political domain, achieving larger peace and stability in the Mediterranean basin. And I will come back maybe during the Q&A, what do I mean by the larger peace and stability in the region? Create common tools tackling security threats, create new dynamics for pluralism and democratic institutions, set clear benchmarks for human and political rights, ease border control and movement, and create institutional frameworks with mandates and authority. Moreover, the issue of governance, which is undoubtedly serious in some Arab countries, need to be at the cornerstone of future discussions. Let me also stress a point which was picked up recently by Joseph Borrell, the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, in one of his speeches about a new start for the Mediterranean. Mr. Borrell said that the renewed partnership with the southern neighbors will tackle the despair of young Arabs leaving their countries because of the war and lack of freedom, jobs, and prospects for the future. I fully agree to that. And I add that the Arab Spring gave rise to greater hopes. However, optimism is replaced with desperation, and I warn that this is not over yet. There are waves to come if we do not act rationally and collectively and act now. On the economic front, creating more southern integration is a must because of the figures that I just demonstrated in front of you now. Like-minded countries could gather around issues such as water scarcity or carbon neutrality and renewable energy production, one of the cornerstones which we aimed at achieving at the UFM. And I'm not sure where we stand with this today. The issue of free movement of services and goods is at the heart of creating synergies between the peoples, any peoples, possibly creating eventually smaller common markets. The technological gap, which keeps southern countries' industries at bay, needs to be tackled with a different approach, one that sees in closing this gap a benefit to everyone, because eventually it entails creating a wider market. Most importantly, the economies of the southern countries must create sufficient numbers of jobs for their young people. We have to think of this. This is, I keep saying this is a bomb that is ticking. We have 350 million Arabs, probably 200 million at least are under the age of 20, 25, something like that. It's just impossible, you know. I mean, what do you expect in the future? So if we fail in that, out of frustration, youngsters will be driven to emigrate. On the social front, reforming the scene for civil society is a must. In southern countries, these institutions need to be given actual teeth. In this context, it also comes to my mind that channeling foreign aid, whether it was for governments or for NGOs, has to be reformulated from the traditional way, which over the years, in my point of view, did not have any clear or widespread impact on the recipient societies, to new ways or forms which actually measures development on ground. But let me tell you this, eventually, I believe that this scheme must be put to stop all foreign aid by way of building capacity in recipient countries in order to self-sustain. I end on the note of self-sustainability because I believe that this is the cornerstone for building proper solidarity. All feel equal, no givers and no takers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very interesting, thought-provoking, partly amusing, but as you said, the funny parts are actually not so funny when you think about it more in detail, right? So I would like to open the floor for Q&A. Please state your name and where you're from and Omar. And also for those connecting online, please put your questions into the Q&A.
Thank you for these questions. Now, when China is a very important player in today's economy, world economy, and obviously it is. I don't want to say it's in conflict with regional projects such as the Union for the Mediterranean, which aims at fostering cooperation in that region. But at a certain time, you will see that they will clash. That is why I believe that in the coming years, it will not be countries picking one another to deal with and work with because of where it is located, in as much as whether it is aligned with its interests and policies. So I am not surprised to see countries in our region working with the Chinese. For instance, given the excellent relations that the Saudis, for instance, have with the Americans, yet a month ago or 2 months ago, the Saudi Crown Prince hosted a Chinese conference. So it shows you that this is a message that the dynamics are different today. And probably I will find interest in what the Chinese are proposing in the Middle East region. Having said this, still, I believe that usually proximity brings people more together. And that is why I propose to have smaller platforms focused on issues that matter to the people. And that takes me to your question, Zainab. The best project always, actually, the best policy that a government internally usually would propose in elections and eventually in office is the one that people can feel that its effect. Today I can work. I'm not bothered about, not finding a job. The health sector is working properly. Transportation is good. Normal things. What are people usually require in any country? Now, when you talk about cooperation among countries, you're talking about sharing experiences and backgrounds and skills. This is why the best cooperation projects should be smaller, focused, aligned, and eventually creating more synergies between the peoples of those countries which are involved. In the sense that, for instance, I always keep saying this, that why not having a Jordanian, for instance, seek an opportunity to work in Morocco, you know, or an Algerian selling his products in Greece? I'm not talking about a wide spectrum. I'm talking about smaller projects. So just to answer your question, the best models are those which eventually are felt by the people. And when the people start believing that the internal policies and also the regional policies of their governments are affecting their lives, they become more in control and actually owning the project, defending the project. This is why, if I go back to the openings of my speech, when we talk about the UFM, and I'm, you know, sometimes ask the question, how many people know about it? How many people know about it? Why? Well, maybe because, you know, people were not affected by it. But maybe someone who managed, you know, to have a factory or an industry which has been labeled by the UFM and it gave them some income or some revenues, they will talk about it. If we spread this, the more that we do this, the more that we create ownership for the people.
If I just may add here, of course, it would also be upon governments to say this is financed by the UFM, right? And very often this is not always what governments do. You know, that if there is a credit to take, they take it from themselves. I'm not talking specifically about any specific country in the Middle East. I'm talking about the same goes for European Union member states. Whenever there is something to take credit for, it's the national government did. Whenever there's something to blame, it's the European Union, right? So that's...
You know, Professor, actually, that is one of the things that prompted me to leave the UFM Secretariat, because exactly as you said, and I said this to Amr Moussa, the Secretary General of the Arab League, I felt that in intergovernmental organizations, when things are going right and beautiful, you know, member states will say, this is because of us. But then when things are wrong, they will point their fingers at the Secretariat or the Secretary General. You have not done your job. There is a problem. But eventually, regional organizations are made of the strengths of their member states, the stakeholders. Look at the Arab League today. It is in a very, if I may say, not good, you know, situation. Why is that? Do we blame Mr. Abul Ghait? No, he is a super diplomat and an official. They lacked organizational structures. I don't think so. We have lots of experts at the Arab League. But why? Well, because the member states are not in agreement on policies. So you have this shape of the institution. you see, Jacob, Syria, because of what happened over the past 10 years, has been marginalized from the Arab League. They don't have they have a seat, on papers, but they are not invited to attend meetings. That is a long story, about how you think about the Syrian crisis, uprising, whether it was a proper uprising from the people, calling for their rights, or if it was, a regime defending, its interest and the interests of the country, the normal rhetoric. However, the more important question that should be put is whether the Arab League is still effective and needed. And that is something that I talked about and addressed maybe like 8 years ago in a lecture also that I presented. Compare the European Union's summits, for instance, with the Arab League summits. They take place every month, I think. There is authority. There is impact. There are decisions. Things have been created on the ground. It can be felt. Obviously, the UK is no more there, but it can be felt by everyone. However, look at the summits and the meetings that took place regularly in the Arab League. Photo opportunities, not more. And actually, it's dwindling over the years. I mean, it's the interest, the appetite, even of the leaders. They don't attend anymore. And even if it attends, it's just, the rhetoric, the normal rhetoric, and nothing happens. And that is why I believe with the smaller blocks that I am suggesting, probably there will be no need for the Arab League. Now, this is very critical and maybe dangerous, what I'm saying, and maybe some Arabs would say, this is really wrong. But then at the end of the day, why do we need organizations if we are not benefiting from it? Probably if you have countries in leagues with like-minded perspectives and understandings, policies and threats, you will not see countries alienated. You will see probably a group that hosts Syria with other countries. But, those policies might not mesh with the policies of other countries, such as, for instance, Jordan, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia, and even China. I don't think that, the smaller that you make things, you will find places for everyone to sit in. Now, we have also to focus on cross cooperation between these blocks. I mean, you don't just want to divide and you turn your face and that's it. No, there has to be also some cooperation. But it's easier to pass decisions when you are sitting around the table with people who think like you. That was my experience of working for 4 years in Brussels and maybe a year or so in Barcelona and others. It's easier. When you sit with people who think like you, you take decisions. When you want to be diplomatic and courteous here and there, your decisions will be mild. So I hope that it answers your question. Lina, your question is quite interesting. Okay. Fix the Agadir agreement. It's because the governments did not have a common platform and no real interest, the 4 governments to work on the Agadir agreement. Everybody is caring about his economy and in the closed way of of mentality. And of course, the EU, which is a patron, for such, agreement, did not put pressure. Like, for instance, I mean, if you don't do that, we will stop doing this. The dynamics, it just was not there. My proposal is that rather than, have the Agadir agreement on issues that might raise questions among countries, let us focus on some common interests. For instance, the issue of energy today is very important. Renewable energy. Europe needs it. We have vast deserts. Let's work on this. You remember, the coal and steel agreement started with what, 8 countries or 6 countries, and it was meant to be for steel and coal. And then there you go, you have the EU now. So if we focus on water, for instance, for Jordan, this is very important for us. Pick a topic and build on it. The issue of aid, I tell you, we should not actually say that Jordan is taking rent for its geopolitical position, and this is why we should keep having people help us. We are not protecting anybody, and we don't want to do that. We should be self-sustainable. And actually, even with the aid that Jordan receives, we're still struggling. Today, I think that we have 2 or 3 billion deficit in the budget, in addition to the aid. Why? Well, because we need to create better economic dynamics in the country, and also better situations for the people to work. So I believe that a country like Jordan, the best solution, and other countries also, the best solution for it is to depart from the mentality, I have friends in Washington and I have friends in Brussels and I can depend on them. No. We have to depend on ourselves. That is my logic and reasoning always.
You're making a lot of friends with that, I suppose, with this position. So we had here, and then first here, and then Nicholas.
Thank you. Is it on? Yeah. Thank you. My name is Leonard. I'm from Germany. Leonard, yes. And when you already answered Zainab's question, but also just now, I kept thinking that everything you're talking about is literally how the European Union started. And you just mentioned the European Steel and Coal Community, 6 countries, 5 years after the war, France and Germany not being like-minded at all, but it took them just 5 years to come together, take a small industry, build on that. Of course, there was the component of wanting to control each other so that another war would not be able to happen again, especially with such a key industry as coal and steel. But even if you take less countries in the region, in North Africa, in the Middle East, what is stopping them? What is really stopping them from doing this? Because also, I guess the biggest success of the European Union is that it just didn't make economical sense to go at war with each other anymore, or to not work together anymore, because everyone benefited from it in the long term. So what is really the roadblock from them, even if it's just 3-4 countries, to really build something sustainable? And maybe then, as a follow-up on that, should third parties like the EU, other countries, international institutions play a role in facilitating this, or should they just not do this at all? Thank you.
Hi, my name's Nicholas. I'm from the US. My question is actually related to Leonard's question. So going back to 2010, you mentioned that there were some member states of the Union for the Mediterranean that showed less than full commitment to the project, and maybe acted in such a way that they effectively limited the scope and capabilities of the Secretariat. My question is, what sense did you have at that time about the European Union and its officials and institutions? Did they tend to view the UFM as a threat? It's this new intergovernmental organization with quite a lot of members. Were they skeptical of it, or did they have the sense that collaboration and economic integration in this huge region is of net benefit?
I have a third question here from the web. Let me just read it. Thank you for your presentation. I'm interested in the nature of the involvement of countries in the UFM that may not have historical ties with the Mediterranean region. For example, as ambassador of Jordan to Luxembourg and Norway, what did you perceive as the main topics of cooperation, and what was the country's general contribution to the UFM? That's a question from Patrick Faber. Or Patrick Faber.
I want to take the two questions of Nicholas and Patrick, because I think they are more or less aligned. Well, it was obvious from day one that the more that you are away from the Mediterranean Sea, you are not as interested as those countries which border or have shores on the sea. For example, it is not a secret that a country like Sweden or Finland, with all due respect, by the way, great nations, and I had the pleasure of working with them at the UFM. Germany, for instance, also, if I may also say that probably the Germans were, forgive me for saying this, the most professional, in dealing with me at the Secretariat. Just, very professional, straight to the point. They get what they want. We get what we want. So I liked working with them. But the reality is that these countries, when we talk about interest, they are not like the Spaniards or the Italians, because this is their region. And so the interest can be different. So I believe that, they were interested. For instance, Luxembourg and Norway, by the way, is not a member of the EU, so they're not part of the UFM, but they were far. Let me also tell you something else now. I don't have solid information about this, but you as an American should hear this. Possibly the Americans were not happy about the UFM, because also if it was meant to succeed, it creates a monster, a huge block. And how does this affect, American hegemony? It does. So I am not sure whether Washington was really very happy about seeing such a big project go on, especially that the US has important interests in the Middle East and in North Africa, but mainly in the Middle East. The question about the EU involvement, let me put it this way. The EU the Commission was involved, but they wanted to run business in the way that they know it, forgetting that we have 16 member states which are not members of the EU, and they did not want to be run in the same model that Brussels run things. So that also complicated the matters a bit. Leonard question, what's stopping them in the southern rim of the Mediterranean to do it, like what they did, between Germany and France? Let me ask you this question. What is the difference between Europe and the Arabian region in terms of politics and internal political structures? Shall I answer you? Okay. Democracy and pluralism. When you have democratic institutions, they, in a way or another, make sure that nations don't go to war and are obliged to cooperate, because the people are dictating things from the grassroots through their elected officials, through their elected governments. If you don't have this, it is very difficult to open up doors and work together, because countries will be subjected to the will of very few group of people. And probably that is the baseline for answering your question and why it's not happening in those countries. The more that we have pluralism and democratic freedoms, I believe that the more you will see proper regional cooperation. This takes me back to the issue of the Arab League. It's just, you know, it's not institutional. It's all about feelings and, you know, limited relations among limited sectors in governments. Did I answer your question? Okay.
Thank you. Can you hear? Yeah. Okay. I am a Spanish American. I wanted to ask, in part because of, apart from your distinguished career as a diplomat, that you are also a lecturer in trade law, and so I was interested to know your perspective on, in terms of the WTO, what are the issues of trade law that are the most important, most salient, and brought by Middle Eastern and North African countries? What issues of trade law are at the top of the minds of those countries?
They can't hear you online. Hi, I'm Josefina from Argentina and the US. And my question is actually kind of related to Leonard's question. You briefly mentioned how what is now the European Union, the European steel community focused on one thing, right? Coal and steel industry, and obviously that had repercussions for peace, stability, economic gain. And you mentioned that, like that, the Mediterranean world should focus on one thing, right? What do you think that one thing should be? How would they start? Thank you.
Thank you so much for meeting with us and talking to us. My name is Rama. I am also from the US. So you mentioned the issue with youth bulges, and we've seen that really was the trigger for the Arab Spring. And so when you talk about the creation of smaller blocs with similar interests, how can that help with addressing youth bulges in the Middle East? Because then youth bulges, if we address that issue, it can help with self-sustaining, it helps with self-reliance to these nations. So which specific policies can these small blocs create in making sure that the youth are satisfied in their opportunities, ample opportunities in each country and course region? Thank you. Rahman.
No, very technical questions, very difficult questions, especially Manuel's question. By the way, my PhD is about WTO law and investment, but that was ages ago. Now you're grilling me on this now. No, I tell you, I mean, look, from a legal point of view, the WTO has been one of the most important international trade opening, frameworks, which allowed countries to work, trade, and overtake what we call the closed inner-looking economic and trade policies, tariffs and alike, you name it. I don't want to get into technicalities, but I think that whether it was the WTO or the association agreement between Arab countries, agreements between Arab countries and the EU, or the free trade agreements between some Arab countries and the US, I think the most important thing is that we have to always lower the import controls and measures that are placed by, if I may say, Western countries in order, to protect its internal industries and markets. Because you see, the field is not leveled. The playing field is not leveled between southern countries, between developing countries, and between, Western economies in the US or in Europe. And so if you want, a farmer in Jordan, for instance, to export tomatoes to the EU, this is something that we always had to deal with, or to the US, you do not expect, that he has a capacity as a Spanish farmer. And obviously, his production is different to those, working in farming and agricultural products in Europe or in the US. So I think it's the tariffs and the barriers that really need always to be thought of. And this is what usually you will hear from developing countries coming to the WTO, that this is what we need to tackle. Rahma's and Josefina question, and I'm not sure if you are a fan of football, but I have to tell you congratulations for winning the World Cup. Okay. It was a great day. I know. I cannot really be specific about, specific policies or what thing that they need to think of, but we have to think of something that generates more employment for youngsters. So probably it is industry or services. That is one of the, one of the domains that countries need to, think of. The issue of technology, and I'm not, good at it, but, these, trendy applications and where we're going in this modern age. And that is something very dear to the young generation. Maybe opening horizons and frameworks in that industry will help, not just actually, by the way, Southern youngsters to work in those areas, but also their counterparts in other countries. I mentioned energy, and I mention it again because I think that it has a vast effect, firstly, on the lives of people. Okay. Also, it has an effect on lowering the bills for industries and for households. And also it generates income and GDP for governments. In addition, of course, it also eases geopolitical threats, for instance, in the situation of Europe, when you are having a war in your back garden, So basically, this is an important topic. There is another topic also, which is transportation. The more that you integrate through transportation, the more that you have goods and services free movement. On the southern rim of the Mediterranean, it is impossible, to take a train and go, for instance, from Amman to, to Damascus, which is only 90 kilometers north of my capital. Okay. However, yesterday I made the terrible mistake of thinking that I was going to Bergamo. So at 6 p.m. I was, or 8 p.m. I was in Bergamo. I called Alessandro. I said, "Where am I? I made a mistake, And they told me, that you are 300 kilometers away from your, conference place. And but this morning, jumped on a train. It was smooth. And here I am. I'm delivering a speech. This is just an example of showing you how important having transportation systems such as rail, and we don't have this. And maybe that is again another issue or domain that needs to be tackled and focused.
Hi, I'm Jonathan and I'm from the Netherlands. I had a question about, we kind of touched on this already a little bit, but like how basically Brussels stands or the EU stands towards Mediterranean within the UFM. Can you, does it work? Okay, great. So my question was like, how does the stance of Brussels or like the EU as a whole, like as the supranational organization, how did you witness that within the UFM? Because they, of course, they like really like these new initiatives, especially when it comes to foreign policy, always launching new stuff. Also right now with PESCO and I don't know, all the communities they want to launch. But when it all comes down to like real trade policies, for example, with all the DCFTAs they have, they're tending to towards more like bilateral agreements, and that of course affects the Arab region we're talking about, especially in cooperation. And I was wondering what you think of that and how, like, if that also like links in some way to like the smaller blocks you were talking about, because I can imagine that smaller blocks might also undermine in some sense like the trade bargaining power of countries in the Arab region towards the EU if the EU keeps insisting on bilateral stances. But maybe like I'm just curious about like your experience so far within UFM.
Hi, I'm Zaina from Jordan. And yeah. And my question, you talked about a bit how you feel like the Arab Spring is not over yet and it will have more to come. I have two questions. One is, why didn't it happen in Jordan? Which is very strange because we have the same issues that other countries have. And the youth were in the streets, but they did not do anything crazy. And the second thing is that you talked about democracy. And yeah, I think a lot of Arabs think that this is what's stopping Arabs from doing better things in both political sphere and the economic sphere. But it seems like over the years, political participation in general in Arab countries is going down. Young people are becoming more and more afraid of being part of the political sphere. Why do you think it's that? And do you feel like it's actually a public policy to scare youth from the political sphere in order to avoid democracy? I think those, yeah, thank you.
Two interesting questions again. I salute you and commend you on such a great students. Well, you know, Jonathan, my experience with Brussels, and I had the honor, you know, to be the ambassador of Jordan to the EU. A very interesting and efficient institution. It can be sometimes, if I may use the word, and forgive me for not being diplomatic, boring and too big and bureaucratic. But the will is there when it comes to reaching out for other blocks or regions and trying to help. The EU is very active on the southern rim of the Mediterranean, has lots of engagements with our countries, and the EU has contributed a lot, I have to say. My always, what I keep saying all the time, and also to my colleagues, the EU ambassadors or, European ambassadors, is that where is the effect? Why do not we see, concrete changes? And we do not want to end up, creating two decks in a society. Those who are able and enlightened and they have an opportunity and they can, have a chance eventually in the working market, and the masses who are not affected by the policies or the help of the European Union. But that is always what concerns me. You raised a very good point about bilateral dealings between the EU and Arab countries. And by the way, this was one of the experiences that we used to witness when we were in Brussels. So what happens is that we sit as Arab ambassadors. We agree, a common agenda that this is how we're going to deal with the EU, and that we have to go collectively and with common interest. And then you will be surprised to note that you'll see the ambassador of Jordan going behind closed doors to trying to promote his country at the expense of the other Arab countries. The same is done by the Egyptian ambassador and by other ambassadors. Well, because of course we have association agreements and we have bilateral relations, and the mandate for countries is bilateral. The EU deals with the Arab countries from its size as one bloc, but it looks at those countries as not one bloc. It looks at them in each country's just itself. Obviously, when you have a bloc dealing with one country on a bilateral level, obviously it has the upper hand. And that is why I'm saying that once you start creating smaller blocks at the southern rim of the Mediterranean, and probably involving other European countries in it, such as, for instance, now there is serious talks between Greece and Cyprus and Jordan and Egypt on the gas issue. There you go. You're talking about 2 European member states of the EU, and you have 2 or 3 countries in this. They're talking about a product. Now, they will have a leverage on the EU and on other states in the region. So you will see, the more that you widen the domain from bilateral issues to smaller blocks, not wide blocks, as I said, because I don't find them very effective, there can be a lot of benefit for those who are involved in such projects. Zaina's questions, the Arab Spring, why didn't it happen in Jordan? Look, I mean, let's be clear about this. I think that we have a stable country. We have lots of issues, obviously, in Jordan, and I am a liberal thinker in Jordan and an official and public figure, and they know how what I have on mind, and they know exactly what I say. We have issues, but we have also a stable country and a strong country. We have also a good leadership, which is rational, and probably it foresaw what was happening in other countries and tried to contain it in a clever way. And I believe also the Jordanians are clever. They saw what happened in other countries, and they did not want to, get into this mess. So it's a combination of factors. Obviously, also we have support from our friends. Jordan is very important for a lot of countries, the US and Europe, and it should not be allowed to, derail or get into, such situations that we are very sad to see, for instance, in other countries like Syria, great country. or other countries. Having said this, there are lots to be done. That takes me to the other question, political participation. It's going, day by day. People in our countries are not interested. I'm not sure in the Arab world or also everywhere. I'm here in Italy. What is the percentage for participation in elections, for instance? I'm not sure, I think that everywhere people are thinking, am I benefiting from this or not? Why should I go to elections? Obviously, the elections rates in Jordan, which I know the figures are not accepted, the last ones. It's not representative, when you have big cities that, people go out with 12% to vote, there is an issue, okay? Or, overall, you're talking about a percentage of 29%, there is an issue. I do not believe that institutions or governmental institutions are imposing any threats to youngsters or people to participate in political domains. In as much I believe that you guys are very clever, this generation, and I think that there is a sense that it's not going to do me any good, so why should I participate? What we need now to do is to change the structure and the narrative and the story and the end game, and make sure to convince youngsters and people, and actually everybody, that this time in Jordan and in other countries, that we are serious about having pluralism and having democratic institutions. Because I believe that democracy is not created from above. Democracy is created from under, from grassroots. And so you cannot also create parties, and you cannot just impose on people that I want you to come out and then vote. The moment that we change the story, and also sometimes you change the story by changing the caliber of people who are telling the story, and also putting, people in positions who have also credibility, because, usually people reference things as who is speaking, who is there, who's sitting there, and if they do not believe in the people to start with, who are telling the story, they're not going to believe the story. The narrative is different. So there is a lot of things to be done, in our region on that front.
Yes. So thank you so much for having come to Bologna via Bergamo.
Now,
Giving
it's on record.
No, it's on record, but you put it on record, not me. For giving a fascinating talk, for engaging with our super students here. And please join me in thanking Ambassador Masa'deh.